My husband once stood before me and said, "I'm taking a trip to rediscover myself with my first love from high school." I smiled faintly and answered, "That's wonderful. I hope you truly find whatever you're looking for." While he was off searching for meaning, I quietly packed my own bags and left. When he returned, my phone was flooded with his messages. Ironically, I'd already found myself first. I was taking my own trip with Stephanie, my first love from high school. Richard had appeared in our bedroom doorway precisely at 4 o'clock that Sunday afternoon, speaking those words with the calm confidence of someone who had practiced them several times in front of the mirror. I was mid-fold with one of his pale blue Oxford shirts, watching his face shift between guilt, anticipation, and something disturbingly close to relief. 9 years. That's how long I had been folding that same shirt every Sunday, always placing it in the third position from the left because that was where he preferred it. 9 years of invisible rituals, small, precise gestures that kept our marriage stitched together so neatly no one could see the fraying until it finally started to unravel. Before we continue, if you believe everyone deserves the freedom to rediscover themselves on their own terms, not under someone else's expectations, consider subscribing. It costs nothing and helps more people find these stories. Now, let's return to Eleanor's Sunday, the one that began like every other. Her body woke her automatically at 6:30 that morning. Richard would stay asleep until 8, as usual, but his coffee had to be ready by 8:15 when he would stumble into the kitchen expecting it to appear as if conjured. 2 spoonfuls of sugar, a splash of cream, in the chipped mug he refused to part with. She moved through the kitchen in the dark, her bare feet mapping out the floorboards from memory, careful to avoid the spot near the refrigerator that groaned under pressure. The coffee maker sputtered to life while she reached for the ingredients for breakfast: eggs, bread, and bacon, each kept in its assigned place. Richard liked his eggs over easy, his toast golden but never crisp, and his bacon arranged perfectly straight on the plate. He had never demanded it that way. She had simply learned through quiet observation, the faint frown when the toast browned too much, the subtle push of his fork when the yolks turned firm. By 7 o'clock, Eleanor was in their bedroom sorting laundry with the precision of muscle memory. Whites, darks, delicates, all forming neat piles across the bed while Richard slept peacefully, unaware. His breathing was steady, occasionally punctuated by the soft snores he swore didn't exist. She studied him in the gentle morning light spilling through the curtains, the unruly tuft of hair on the left side, the faint lines deepening around his eyes, the looseness of his features that made him look almost boyish. These were the moments she treasured most, the quiet before the performance of marriage began. Before she had to smile at recycled jokes or nod through another sports recap she didn't care about. Before she had to become the version of Eleanor who made Richard's world function. The scent of banana bread lingered from the loaf she'd baked the day before. Richard would eat 2 slices for breakfast, then forget it existed by noon. These small rituals of love had become second nature, done without thought, like breathing or blinking. He hadn't thanked her in years, but she told herself that's what marriage was about: silent appreciation, unspoken teamwork, invisible effort. Their monthly brunch with Rachel and Mark was scheduled for noon. Eleanor had chosen the restaurant, made the reservation, reminded Richard twice during the week and once again that morning. Rachel had been her closest friend since college, the only one who remembered her before she became Richard's wife. Back when her opinions didn't require a quick scan of his expression before being voiced. At the restaurant, Richard ordered for her without asking. "She'll have the spinach salad, dressing on the side," he told the waiter. Eleanor had been craving the French toast she'd spotted on another table, but she smiled politely and said nothing, another skill she had long mastered. "So, one of my students, Paul, has been struggling with reading," she began, her voice bright with the excitement of finally sharing something meaningful. "On Friday, Did you catch the game last night?" Richard interrupted, turning to Mark with sudden energy. "That fourth quarter was wild." Her words vanished midair, fading like steam off hot coffee. This was their rhythm. She spoke, he redirected, and she retreated into silence. About 20 minutes later, as if realizing she still existed, Richard glanced her way. What were you saying about that student? But the moment was gone. She summed up her story in 2 brief sentences, watching his attention drift before he flagged the waiter for another coffee refill. In the restroom afterward, Rachel touched up her lipstick and asked softly, "Does he always do that?" Eleanor frowned. "Do what?" "Interrupt you. Ignore you. Treat your thoughts like filler between his own conversations." Eleanor wanted to defend him, to say Richard didn't mean it, that he was just passionate or distracted, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she noticed something she'd never really seen before: how Rachel's husband had stood when she left the table, how he'd asked her opinion about the wine, how he actually listened when she spoke. "He's just tired," Eleanor said finally. "Work's been rough." Rachel met her eyes in the mirror. "Abby, when was the last time he asked about your day and really listened?" The question lingered, heavy and unavoidable. Eleanor couldn't remember. When they got home, Richard disappeared into the couch, scrolling through his phone while the television murmured in the background. Every few minutes he laughed at something on his screen, occasionally turning it toward her, a meme she didn't get, a video that didn't amuse her. "Remember Stephanie Monroe?" he asked suddenly, holding up his phone. A photo glowed on the screen, a smiling blonde woman on a hiking trail, tanned arms, bright eyes, and the unmistakable ease of someone living happily. His first love from high school. "Yeah," he said, "she just got divorced. Really found herself, started this whole self-discovery thing. Hiking, meditation, all that." He kept scrolling through her photos, his focus so intent it made my chest tighten. "We should get hiking boots," he added. "Start being more active." But I knew he wasn't talking about us, he meant himself. In 9 years of marriage, Richard had never once suggested we exercise together. Not until Stephanie Monroe's divorce update had apparently reignited something inside him. Then I began noticing changes. Teeth whitening strips appeared in our bathroom cabinet. The scent of cologne I hadn't smelled since our dating years drifted through the hallway. He actually started using the gym membership he'd paid for but ignored for 3 years. He spent longer in front of mirrors, sucking in his stomach, brushing his fingers through thinning hair, studying his reflection as though he were meeting himself for the first time. By 3:30 that afternoon, I was in our bedroom again, folding laundry that had finished drying while we were out. Richard's shirts demanded a ritual of precision, collars laid perfectly flat, sleeves crossed neatly, the third button fastened. My hands moved on instinct, but my mind drifted back to Rachel's question. When was the last time Richard asked about my day? When had he last noticed the spotless kitchen, his favorite dinner waiting, the exact cereal brand he preferred stocked in the pantry? When, exactly, had I disappeared inside my own marriage? That was when Richard appeared in the doorway, and I knew, just as you can sense an oncoming storm by the pressure in the air, that our carefully rehearsed Sunday routine was about to collapse. "I need to tell you something important, Eleanor." His tone made me look up. He never called me Eleanor anymore. I was Abby, Abs, or Han when he wanted something. Eleanor was reserved for moments that changed everything. "I'm taking a trip to find myself," he said, then paused before adding, "with Stephanie, my first love from high school." The shirt in my hands went still. I waited for an explanation, an apology, some attempt to make sense of it, but he just stood there, shifting like a teenager asking to borrow the car, gauging how much freedom I'd allow. The words hung between us like smoke from a candle just snuffed out. I smoothed a wrinkle in his blue Oxford that wasn't really there and heard my own voice come out calm, almost detached. "That's nice. I hope you find what you're looking for." Richard's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. He had clearly rehearsed this scene. I saw it in his stance, hands subtly raised, ready to deflect anger, tears, or whatever object might come flying his way. But I kept folding, slow and deliberate, pressing each crease perfectly. "You're not upset?" he asked. "Why would I be?" I said, placing his shirt neatly with the rest, everyone lined up like soldiers. "You obviously need this. Everyone deserves to find themselves, don't they?" His face flickered through so many expressions I almost laughed: relief, suspicion, confusion, then something faintly like disappointment. Had he wanted a fight? Proof of his importance through my heartbreak? Abby, you're amazing, he said at last, rushing forward to kiss my forehead. His lips were dry, his breath scented with that new cologne from his dresser. This is why I married you. You understand me. You get me. The words sank into me like stones. Not I love you. Not you're my world. Just that I made his choices easier, that I made him comfortable. I realized then I was little more than another reliable feature of his life, like the dishwasher or the navigation system in his car, useful, dependable, needing no upkeep. You should get proper hiking gear, I said, turning back to the laundry basket. Colorado weather can be unpredictable. Maybe those moisture-wicking shirts they sell at REI. Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking, he said quickly, energized. Stephanie says the elevation can be rough if you're not prepared. Stephanie says. Already, she was his authority, his compass toward authenticity. By Monday morning, Richard had transformed into someone unrecognizable. He took the entire week off work, something he'd never done for an anniversary or even my birthday, to prepare for his journey of self-discovery. Later, the credit card statements would tell the story. $300 hiking boots he'd wear twice, $150 on meditation apps and audiobooks about enlightenment, and athletic gear that cost more than my entire teaching wardrobe. Look at these reviews, he said over breakfast, thrusting his phone toward me. The retreat in Colorado looked straight out of a wellness magazine. Mountain views, luxury cabins, yoga decks overlooking misty valleys. It's supposed to be transformative, he said. Transformative? I echoed, spreading jam on my toast. That's wonderful. Then I saw the price tag, $3,000 for 2 weeks. More than our mortgage, more than the 5th anniversary trip to Florida he'd complained about for months afterward. It's an investment, he insisted, catching my silence. In ourselves. In our future. Our future, planned with another woman. By Tuesday, shopping bags covered the floor, gear from 3 different outdoor stores. He modeled each outfit like a teenager testing identities, asking which color looked better for photos. The blue shirt, I said quietly. It'll bring out your eyes in the mountain light. He beamed, as though I'd granted him permission for something far larger than a wardrobe choice. By Wednesday evening, I helped him pack. The process felt almost peaceful, careful folds, organized stacks, everything in its place. Only the steady repetition of Stephanie's name broke the rhythm. Stephanie says we should pack light. Stephanie thinks morning hikes are more spiritual. Stephanie believes in digital detoxing, so I might not have service. Each mention was a small cut, but I'd stopped feeling them individually. They gathered instead into a single dull ache, an emotional anesthesia spreading slow and deep. These shirts will photograph well, I said, folding his new hiking clothes with the same precision I'd given his work shirts for 9 years. The fabric won't show sweat. Richard looked at me then, his expression full of quiet awe, as if he couldn't quite comprehend that I was still helping him get ready to leave. How are you so perfect about this? He'd asked, like my calmness was a performance to be scored. Perfect. As if responding to betrayal required grading criteria. By Thursday morning, Rachel had had enough of my evasive texts. She insisted we meet for coffee. We always met at the same place downtown, a small cafe where the barista knew our orders and the corner booth stayed reserved for us until 11. She skipped the pleasantries the moment we sat down. Her hand shot across the table, gripping mine so tightly her wedding ring pressed into my skin. He's literally telling you he's going on a romantic getaway with another woman. It's a journey of self-discovery, I corrected, stirring sugar into my coffee, each motion careful, mechanical. Stop it, Abby. Stop pretending this is normal. I'm supporting my husband's growth, I said, smiling with lips that felt painted on. Isn't that what wives do? Rachel's eyes searched my face like she was decoding a foreign language. Her expression shifted from concern to confusion to something sharp and knowing. She leaned back, the corner of her mouth lifting. Eleanor Fairfield, what are you planning? I'm planning to be the supportive wife Richard deserves. Something in the way I said deserves made her release my hand. A slow, satisfied smile spread across her face, the same look she used to get in college whenever she figured out the professor's trick question first. How long have you been planning this? I don't know what you mean, I replied evenly. She lowered her voice, leaning in. I've known you for 15 years. You spent 3 months plotting revenge on Chelsea Morrison's sophomore year before anyone realized she'd stolen your thesis idea. This, she gestured between us, this calm act, the perfect wife routine. You're planning something. I lifted my cup and took a long sip, letting the heat settle in my chest. Richard needs to find himself, I said. I think it's important to give him the space to do that. Rachel's grin widened. Oh my God, you're really going to do it. Do what? Whatever it is you're planning, and it's going to be spectacular. We sat quietly for a moment, both remembering the woman I used to be before Richard, organized, decisive, unwilling to accept less than I deserved. Rachel had watched that woman fade under the weight of compromise and accommodation. Now, something in my expression must have told her that woman was finally waking up. That evening, while Richard admired himself in the bedroom mirror, modeling his new hiking gear and testing out poses, I moved silently through the house with my phone, photographing everything. The kitchen appliances I'd bought with teaching bonuses. The furniture I'd paid for using my grandmother's inheritance. The paintings gifted by my family. 9 years of accumulation and almost every valuable item traced back to my own income, my own choices. Richard, lost in his reflection, didn't notice. He was too busy convincing himself that this trip, these clothes, this Stephanie, would reveal his authentic self. He practiced different smiles, no doubt imagining which one would look best on Stephanie's Instagram feed. Do these pants make me look younger? He asked, turning sideways. You look like yourself, I said. It wasn't an answer, but it was enough for him. Later that night, after he'd fallen asleep, still wearing his new hiking socks, I sat in the living room with my laptop open to the listing for the apartment I'd rented 3 months earlier. Just in case, I'd told myself at the time. A quiet backup plan, insurance against the distance that had been widening between us. The landlord had agreed to keep my arrangement discreet. Maybe he'd recognized the look in my eyes, the look of someone preparing for an ending. The place was small but bright, with wide windows that actually opened and a kitchen bathed in morning sunlight. Over time, I'd furnished it piece by piece, quietly removing things from our home. A chair here, a lamp there, books I claimed were going to my classroom library. I told Richard the first was donating to charity or helping Rachel redecorate. In reality, I was building a lifeboat while still pretending the ship wasn't sinking. Friday morning dawned with a bright, smug kind of sunlight, as if the universe was in on the secret. Richard had been up since 5, checking and rechecking his bags, laying out his outfits in order of planned wear. He moved through the house like a whirlwind of excitement. I made his coffee one last time, 2 sugars, a splash of cream, and watched him gulp it down without a thought. His phone buzzed repeatedly, each new message lighting up his face in a way that twisted something deep inside me. Not jealousy, just the strange ache of seeing a stranger use what once belonged to you. The Uber will be here in 10 minutes, he announced, though I hadn't asked. He was dressed for Colorado, brand new hiking pants, a moisture-wicking shirt, and boots that squeaked with each step. He looked like a mannequin from an outdoor store pretending to be someone adventurous. When the car pulled up, he grabbed his bags with the excitement of a child heading to summer camp. At the door, he hesitated, remembering he had a wife to say goodbye to. The kiss he pressed against my forehead was light, detached, already gone before it landed. I'll come back renewed, he promised, hand on the doorknob, voice rehearsed, probably stolen from one of his self-help audiobooks. Before I could respond, his phone rang. Stephanie. His entire face lit up. Hey, yes, I'm leaving now, he said, his tone lifting as he walked toward the Uber, forgetting to even close the front door. The airport shuttle, yeah, Terminal B. Can't wait to. I closed the door softly and listened to his voice fade down the street. Through the kitchen window, I watched the car disappear around the corner, Richard's silhouette still visible in the back seat, gesturing animatedly, already lost in whatever Stephanie was saying. The silence that settled after Richard's departure wasn't the usual hollow quiet that filled the house when he left for work. It was alive, expectant. The kind of stillness that exists right before the first note of a symphony. I walked to the coffee maker, the expensive one I'd bought for myself with birthday money last year, and brewed a cup of the good beans, the Ethiopian blend I usually reserved for guests. I ground them fresh, savoring each step, the hum of the grinder, the rich scent rising like a promise. Richard preferred the cheap pre-ground stuff, but this morning felt like an occasion. Exactly 20 minutes later, Rachel's car pulled up in the driveway with the precision of a mission launch. She stepped out carrying 2 bottles of wine and a stack of cardboard boxes, her grin halfway between conspirator and party host. Liberation Day, she announced, sweeping through the doorway without waiting for an invitation. I brought reinforcements. Before I could ask what she meant, Mark's truck rumbled in behind her, followed by a U-Haul driven by my sister, Hannah. She must have left Dallas at 4 in the morning to arrive this fast. She climbed out, oversized sunglasses covering her eyes, her smile wide and mischievous. "You didn't think I'd miss this, did you?" she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of vanilla perfume and Red Bull. I made a playlist. It's called Freedom Sounds Better. What I'd pictured as a quiet, methodical operation became something entirely different. Mark immediately took charge of logistics, measuring furniture and calculating truck space with an engineer's precision. Hannah connected her phone to the house speakers, filling the rooms with a mix of empowerment anthems and breakup songs that somehow made me laugh instead of cry. Rachel set up camp in the kitchen with her label maker, producing stickers like books Richard pretended to read, kitchen stuff he couldn't identify, and actual art versus his sports posters. By noon, the house had shifted from moving day to full-blown celebration. Mark popped open a bottle of champagne he'd apparently brought for the occasion and poured it into my grandmother's crystal glasses, the ones Richard always wanted to sell. "To Eleanor," he said, raising his glass, for finally choosing herself. We toasted in the half-empty living room, sunlight spilling through windows that suddenly looked larger without Richard's oversized entertainment center blocking half the wall. At 12:30, Mrs. Kapoor from next door appeared with a tray of sandwiches and a knowing look. "I saw Richard leave with fancy hiking luggage," she said, setting the food down. "My husband had the same set when he ran off with his secretary 15 years ago. Men are not creative creatures." She squeezed my hand gently, her expression full of quiet solidarity. "You need help? My grandson has strong back." As we packed, the truth of my marriage unfolded in the division of our belongings. The coffee maker Richard bragged about? My money. The memory foam mattress topper that saved my back? My purchase. He'd called it unnecessary. The kitchen tools and cookware, carefully collected from estate sales? Mine. My grandmother's china, dismissed by Richard as too fussy, now wrapped tenderly in bubble wrap by Rachel, who remembered eating from those plates at my college graduation. "Look at this," Hannah said, pointing to the corner of the living room that had clearly been Richard's domain. The mismatched recliner, the massive television he had to have, the exercise bike that doubled as a laundry rack. 9 years, I murmured, staring at the space. 9 years, and everything worth keeping fits in one truck. Mark loaded boxes with quiet efficiency while Rachel's labeling grew more creative. Abby's grandmother's silver that Richard tried to pawn, photo albums, pre-Richard, when Abby smiled for real. Hannah documented the whole thing with her phone, calling it evidence of liberation. She filmed as we laughed over Richard's secret stash of expired protein powder from 2019 and Rachel's dramatic readings of the motivational quotes he'd taped to our bathroom mirror. By 3 o'clock, the truck was packed. The house, his house now, looked strange, hollow, like a smile with too many missing teeth. But instead of sadness, what I felt was honesty. Stripped bare, this was what Richard had truly contributed to our life together. Empty space and bad taste. At his dresser, I sat down with a pen and paper, composing my final words carefully. The note needed to be exact, no bitterness, no drama, just truth. I wrote it 3 times until it sounded right. Richard, I took your advice and found myself. Turns out I was here all along, just buried under 9 years of being who you needed me to be. The divorce papers are with your attorney. I hope Stephanie helps you find whatever it is you're searching for. You deserve each other. Eleanor. I folded it neatly and slipped it between his hiking socks and dress socks, somewhere he'd find it only after the panic of discovery had passed. Hannah waited by the front door as I took one last slow walk through the house. Each room carried memories, but they felt distant now, like photographs of someone else's life. The kitchen where I'd cooked countless unnoticed meals. The living room where we'd sat together, yet apart, he lost in his phone, me in my thoughts. The bedroom where we'd slept side by side, strangers under the same roof. I locked the door for the final time, sliding my key under the mat where we'd always kept the spare. The click of the lock sounded final, clean and satisfying, like the last puzzle piece snapping into place. The convoy of vehicles rolled away from Richard's house, my former house, like a reverse funeral procession, heading toward life instead of away from it. Hannah drove the U-Haul while I rode in the passenger seat, watching familiar streets give way to new ones. Rachel and Mark followed behind, turning my departure into something that felt less like escape and more like graduation. My new apartment stood on a tree-lined street downtown, far enough from the old neighborhood that I'd never run into Richard at the grocery store. The afternoon sun caught the windows of my third-floor unit, making them glow like a promise. As we pulled into the parking lot, my phone buzzed. I didn't need to check it. I already knew Richard had started discovering what self-discovery with Stephanie truly meant. "Home sweet home," Hannah said, cutting the engine. "Your new life starts now." We moved together like a well-rehearsed team. Mark and his brother handled the furniture. Rachel directed boxes with her label system, ensuring everything went exactly where it belonged. And for the first time in 9 years, everything I owned, everything that mattered, was finally in a space that belonged only to me. Hannah kept the music playing and the energy light, occasionally lifting random objects for the group's judgment. "Keep or toss?" she asked, holding up a framed wedding photo from my dresser. "Keep," I said after a pause, surprising even myself. "But put it in storage." Evidence of temporary insanity. By early evening, the framework of my new life was taking shape. The apartment smelled of cardboard and fresh beginnings. My grandmother's china gleamed from the kitchen cabinets, catching the soft amber of sunset. Her old rocking chair fit perfectly by the window, angled to face the horizon I'd finally have time to appreciate. Rachel opened a bottle of wine while Mark assembled my bed frame, the one I'd bought last year after Richard complained about the mattress being too soft, though he'd never offered to help pay for it. Hannah hung my pictures, deliberately positioning them at my eye level rather than Richard's taller one. To Eleanor, Mark said once the major pieces were in place, raising his beer with a grin. For having the courage to choose herself. We toasted amid boxes resting on my grandmother's rug, the one Richard always wanted to replace with something more modern. The space felt right for the first time in years, like slipping into clothes that finally fit after years of squeezing into someone else's taste. When everyone left, promising to return for Phase 2, the next day, I stood alone in my new home. That's when the wave hit, grief, raw and unexpected, so strong it made my knees buckle. I grabbed the edge of the counter, breathless. But it wasn't Richard the first mourned. I was grieving the woman who had folded his shirts with ritual devotion for 9 years. The woman who turned down a department head position because he expected dinner on the table by 6. The woman who stopped painting because the spare room became first his office, then his gym, then his cluttered storage space. The tears came fast and violent. I slid down the kitchen wall until I sat on the cool tile, crying for all the quiet deaths of my own possibilities. The children we never had first because he wasn't ready, then because the timing wasn't right, then because he needed to find himself. The art classes I skipped so he could golf. The friendships I let fade because he found my friends too feminist. An hour later, Hannah came back for something she'd forgotten in her car. She found me on the floor, red-eyed and shaking. She didn't ask questions. She just sat down beside me, wrapping her arm around my shoulders until the sobs burned themselves out. "I wasted 9 years," I whispered into her shoulder. "No," she said softly but firmly. "You learned for 9 years. Now you know exactly who you'll never be again." Her words landed like a bomb, simple, grounding. When I finally stood, I felt hollowed out but lighter, as if the grief had scrubbed something clean inside me. Hannah made tea in my kitchen using my kettle and poured it into my cup. We sat at the small dining table I'd bought secondhand from an estate sale, another thing Richard had once called depressing, and watched the city lights come alive through the window. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "We've been waiting for you to come back to us." That night, I slept sprawled diagonally across my bed, limbs taking up all the space that had once been his. The silence in the room wasn't empty, it was full, like a blank canvas waiting for paint. Sunday arrived with 17 unread emails from Richard. I didn't open them, but Rachel, ever thorough, screenshotted each one for documentation purposes and couldn't resist reading excerpts over morning coffee. "Listen to this," she said. "How could you abandon our home?" She looked up, smirking. "Our home?" The man who couldn't remember when trash day was suddenly cares about our home. The messages escalated quickly, confusion morphing into anger, then bargaining. "Where are you?" Became "This is insane, then we need to talk like adults," and finally, "Please, just call me." By Monday, Richard had discovered the therapeutic power of Facebook. The man who'd always mocked social media as for attention seekers now filled his feed with cryptic laments about betrayal and life's unexpected challenges. "Sometimes the person you trust most becomes a stranger," Rachel read aloud from his post, snorting. "Oh look," his coworker commented asking if he's okay, and Richard replied, "I'm learning that not everyone deserves your loyalty." "The man who left his wife for another woman is lecturing about loyalty?" I said, shaking my head. Mutual friends started messaging privately, wanting to know what had happened. My replies were brief and factual. Richard went on a journey of self-discovery with another woman. I gave him the space he needed. The truth was enough. It didn't require decoration. Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. 3 different friends had sent me the same viral video, each message accompanied by laughing emojis and "You need to see this." The video opened with Stephanie Monroe, barely recognizable from her filtered Facebook photos. She stood in what looked like the Colorado Retreat's parking lot, blonde hair wild, makeup streaked, eyes blazing. "I need everyone to know," she said into her camera, "that Richard Fairfield is a lying narcissist who told me his marriage was over. He said his wife supported this journey." The next clip showed her inside a hotel room, Richard's brand new hiking gear unmistakable in the background. "This pathological liar had me believing we were both divorced, both free to explore our connection," she snapped. Then I called to add my name to the reservation, and guess what? It's under Mr. and Mrs. Fairfield. The final video was pure cinematic justice. Stephanie stood beside a mountain creek, holding Richard's pristine, $300 hiking boots, the ones he'd agonized over for hours. "You want to find yourself, Ben?" She shouted into the camera, her voice echoing over the rushing water. She hurled the boots into the stream. "Then find yourself single." The boots vanished downstream as Stephanie continued her furious commentary about midlife crises and men who never truly grew up. By Tuesday afternoon, her video had crossed 10,000 views. Someone had even shared it on our high school alumni page with the caption, "Remember when these two dated junior year? Some things never change." On Wednesday, I was setting up my classroom for afternoon art period when a text from Rachel's husband, Mark, popped up. "You'll never guess who I just picked up from the airport." What followed was a live play-by-play of Richard's return, 11 days early from his supposedly transformative 2-week retreat. During the entire ride, he'd ranted about ungrateful wives and psychotic ex-girlfriends, apparently convinced Stephanie had lost her mind for no reason and that I'd overreacted to a harmless vacation. Mark texted again. He just said, "She's probably at her sister's crying into wine." Should I tell him? No, I replied. Let him find out himself. At 3:47, Mark's final message arrived, just dropped him off. He's about to discover what finding yourself really costs. That evening, Mrs. Kapoor called, her tone a mix of scandal and glee. "Your husband sat on lawn crying like baby," she reported. "Screaming at phone, pulling his hair. Very dramatic. My grandson filmed for TikTok." The mental picture composed, image-conscious Richard unraveling on the front lawn he'd once measured weekly for curb appeal was almost poetic. Thursday morning at precisely 7:15, my phone rang. Vera Fairfield's number. Of course. That was her preferred hour for what she called handling unpleasant matters. I let it ring 3 times before answering, steadying my breath. Eleanor, she began, her voice sharp and sugar-coated. What you've done to my son is unforgivable. I sat at my small kitchen table, watching sunlight drift across my apartment walls. Vera had always treated disapproval like an art form, her weapon of choice at family dinners, slipped between polite smiles and cutting remarks about my cooking, my career, or my failure to provide grandchildren on her schedule. Good morning to you too, Vera. Don't you dare take that tone with me, she snapped. You've humiliated Richard publicly. The entire neighborhood is talking about how you abandoned him. He left for Colorado with another woman, I said calmly, stirring honey into my tea. I simply relocated while he was gone. It was a camping trip, she protested, voice rising. An innocent reunion with an old friend. You've blown this completely out of proportion. I almost laughed. Vera had spent 9 years telling me I was too sensitive, too emotional, too much. And now, she wanted me to be understanding about her son's 2-week reunion with his high school girlfriend. Vera, I said slowly, your 40-year-old son ran off with his ex for a spiritual awakening. That's not camping, it's a midlife crisis, with a side of adultery. How dare you, she shrieked. He told me himself, I continued evenly. Stephanie Monroe, his first love, the one who got away. His exact words were that he needed to find himself with her in Colorado. The silence that followed was so thick I could hear her breath falter. Vera Fairfield, who always had the last word, was momentarily speechless. I'm calling the police, she finally hissed. You've stolen from him. That's theft. I took my grandmother's china, my clothes, and the furniture I paid for, I said. If Richard wants to dispute ownership, he can contact my lawyer. Your lawyer, she echoed, aghast. You've already involved lawyers? After everything we've done for you. Everything they'd done for me. Like the Christmas when she'd given everyone thoughtful presents but handed me a weight loss book. Or my birthday dinner when she sat me at the children's table because someone has to watch them. Or the countless times she'd introduced me not by name, but as Richard's wife, as if I were an accessory rather than a person. Vera, I need to go, I said, glancing at the clock. I have a class to teach. This isn't over, she warned. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of woman you really are. They already do, I replied. I'm the kind who refuses to be anyone's backup plan. I hung up before she could respond. My hands didn't shake. By Friday afternoon, another Fairfield name lit up my phone, Richard. The successful older brother. The lawyer who'd made partner before 30 and made sure everyone knew it. Vera had clearly unleashed her best weapon. Eleanor, he began, his voice smooth, professional, what Richard used to call Richard's courtroom tone. I think we should discuss this situation rationally. Hello, Richard. Look, I understand you're upset. Ben made a mistake, but this reaction seems extreme. I put him on speaker and continued grading my students' art projects, bursts of color and imagination spread across the table like rebellion itself. Which part seems extreme? I asked. Leaving while he was with another woman, or hiring a lawyer afterward? The part where you're destroying my brother over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I repeated, affixing a gold star to Mackenzie's watercolor. Is that what we're calling it now? Ben says you gave him permission to go, Richard insisted. That you understood he needed space. I told him I hoped he found what he was looking for, I said. And he did. Consequences. Richard sighed, the sound of a man realizing he was losing ground. Eleanor, be reasonable. You mean like Thanksgiving 2 years ago? I asked. When he spent the whole dinner texting while I served your family alone? Richard hesitated. Yes, I remember. Or last year's anniversary, I continued. The one he forgot, but somehow managed to post a birthday message to Stephanie Monroe that same week? This time silence. I could almost hear him recalibrating. Finally, his tone softened. We always wondered why you stayed, he admitted quietly. Mom said you were lucky to have him, But Dad and we saw it. The way he treated you. Like his personal assistant, I said. Or maybe you preferred when he called my teaching career a cute little hobby. That was Easter, right after I won Teacher of the Year. He was jealous, Richard said quietly after a long pause. You were successful at something that mattered. He was just existing. It was the most honest thing any Fairfield had ever said to me. Then you understand why I left, I replied. I do, he admitted. But Mom won't stop until she gets her way. You know how she is. That sounds like a Richard problem, I said evenly. Not an Eleanor problem. Saturday morning brought proof that Richard's self-discovery had turned into financial panic. My lawyer forwarded a string of increasingly desperate emails with the subject lines urgent and need info now. Richard had just realized he couldn't access my savings account, the one containing my grandmother's $50,000 inheritance and 5 years of careful saving from teaching bonuses and summer school paychecks. The joint checking account painted a different picture. Once I withdrew my documented contributions, Richard was left with exactly $347.82. His deposits had always been sporadic, barely covering his own expenses, while my teaching salary had quietly sustained our mortgage, utilities, groceries, and every other necessity of our lives. His emails sounded like the ramblings of a man facing adulthood for the first time at 40. What's the mortgage payment again? When is the water bill due? What's the Netflix password? How do I access the insurance information? 9 years. 9 years of marriage, and he didn't know a single basic detail. He'd never realized that I'd been paying most of those bills alone for the last 3. By Saturday evening, Rachel had declared herself an avenging angel. I've had enough of his victim routine, she said when she called, her voice electric with righteous energy. Check Facebook. Her post was titled Richard's Journey of Self-Discovery, a Timeline. It was meticulous. Screenshots of his texts to me over the past 3 months, each message showing growing distance and deception. Photos from friends' pages revealed him at restaurants he'd sworn were business dinners. And right in the center, highlighted in bold red, was the $3,000 receipt from the Colorado retreat, charged to our joint account. But the comment section was where the true masterpiece unfolded. His high school classmates chimed in first. Remember when he was finding himself with 3 girls junior year? Didn't he pull the same spiritual awakening stunt in college? My sister dated him for a few months. He ghosted her for a week and turned up with his ex. The thread grew like wildfire. It turned out I wasn't Richard's first casualty of self-enlightenment. I was just the one who'd stayed the longest. By Sunday, Vera had called 6 times. Richard texted twice, apologizing for her, and Richard's emails had devolved from angry to pitiful to pseudo-legal threats about intentional infliction of emotional distress. But the message that caught me off guard came from a name I didn't recognize, Isabel, Stephanie Monroe's best friend from high school. Eleanor, you don't know me, but I thought you should know Stephanie had no idea Richard was still married. She's mortified. Also, this isn't the first time. My cousin dated him 5 years before you. Same story, different woman. Stay strong. 5 years before me. Which meant during me. The revelation didn't hurt. It unlocked something instead, a quiet, solid sense of peace. I wasn't special to Richard. Not as a love, not even as a victim. I was simply the one who'd stayed long enough to make leaving inconvenient. Monday morning brought poetic justice I couldn't have scripted better myself. During my 2nd grade art class, as I helped 7-year-olds craft construction paper self-portraits, my phone buzzed. A message from my lawyer read, Richard just discovered the utility situation. His emails are colorful. Apparently, the power had been cut off at 8 a.m. sharp when the final bill in my name came due. Richard, who had never paid a single utility bill in 9 years, was learning that services required names, deposits, and credit scores, things he'd always ignored while I handled everything. The gas company wanted $300 upfront. Electric required $250. Internet and cable both demanded deposits because Richard's credit, which I'd quietly maintained for years, had tanked during his spiritual awakening. Miss Fairfield, why are you smiling? Asked Emma, one of my students, her cheeks streaked with red paint. "Sometimes," I said, helping her cut a paper heart, "good things happen to patient people." At lunch, I checked my email again. Mark had forwarded Richard's latest neighborhood Facebook post. Richard had written, "Does anyone know a utility company that doesn't charge ridiculous deposits? Feels like extortion." The replies were merciless. Mrs. Kapoor commented first, "Maybe if you paid your bills instead of running off with girlfriends, companies would trust you." Then came the mortgage fallout. Without my income, Richard couldn't refinance. Without my signature, he couldn't sell. The next payment was due in 2 weeks, and $347 wouldn't stretch far. He'd even tried to claim my grandmother's inheritance through a shaky marital property argument. The bank manager, according to my lawyer, had laughed out loud while explaining that inheritance remains separate property. Vera refused to co-sign. "He needs to learn responsibility," she'd told the attorney. Richard declined to lend money, citing his own family expenses. And Stephanie, bless her soul-searching heart, had not only blocked him on every platform, but was now posting couples yoga selfies with a new instructor tagged #AuthenticLove. Tuesday afternoon, I was restocking paintbrushes when the school secretary appeared at my door, looking uneasy. "There's a situation in the parking lot," she whispered. "A man claiming to be your husband." Through the window, I saw him, Richard, arguing with the security guard beside his dented car. His hair was greasy, his shirt wrinkled, and his gestures wild, desperate. A small group of mothers stood nearby, recording him with their phones. Clara Jennings, mother of twin girls in my class, marched up to him, all 5 feet of fury. "Excuse me, are you supposed to be here?" "I need to see my wife," he shouted, loud enough for me to hear through the glass. "Ex-wife," Clara corrected crisply. And for the first time in 9 years, I realized I didn't flinch at the sound of it. "And she's teaching," Clara added dryly to Richard, arms crossed. "You know, working. That thing adults do." Rachel Martinez joined her, phone already filming. "Isn't this the guy who ran off with some blonde from high school?" "It was a spiritual journey," Richard protested, voice cracking. "Is that what we're calling it now?" asked Sonia Chin, Mrs. Kapoor's daughter-in-law. "Because my mother-in-law says you cried on your lawn for 3 hours. Very spiritual." The security guard finally convinced Richard to leave, though not before half a dozen parents captured the entire exchange and posted it to the school's WhatsApp group. The captions were glorious. "This is why we stand Miss Fairfield," and just like that, the trash took itself out. That evening, Clara knocked on my apartment door carrying a casserole and a business card. "My husband's a divorce attorney," she said, smirking. "Better than whoever you've got now. He'll destroy this man pro bono, just for entertainment." Wednesday brought a call from Richard's boss, Paul, not to be confused with Mark. At this point, all mediocre men blurred together. "Eleanor," Paul began cautiously, "I wanted to give you a courtesy call. We had to let Richard go." I set down my coffee cup. "Oh. He missed the Callahan presentation while he was in Colorado. That's our biggest client." Then, when he got back, he told Mr. Callahan that material success was meaningless compared to spiritual enlightenment. He actually suggested our client try meditation instead of market expansion. I pressed my lips together to keep from laughing. "Sounds like Richard's found himself." "There's more," Paul continued. HR reviewed his time logs. He'd been using sick days for what he labeled couples counseling for the past 3 months. "But you weren't in counseling, were you?" "No," I said evenly. "He was meeting Stephanie Monroe." Paul exhaled. "That's what we thought." A few coworkers forwarded concerning emails. "He blamed his performance issues on you. Called you controlling and emotionally abusive." Others confirmed he'd been seen at restaurants with another woman on nights he claimed to be with clients. The irony was almost poetic. Richard, who couldn't manage to buy milk without 3 reminders, calling me controlling. The same man I'd guided through every adult task like a living GPS, claiming I was abusive. "His final paycheck will be mailed to his parents' address," Paul finished. "And for what it's worth, everyone here knew you were the reason he held it together as long as he did." Thursday arrived with what my attorney, Grace Whitaker, called the crown jewel of consequences. She had timed Richard's official service for maximum effect, Thursday evening, right in the middle of Vera Fairfield's weekly family dinner. The entire extended Fairfield clan was present when a process server walked in and handed Richard the divorce papers. The terms were simple, fair, and firm. Clean split. No alimony. I kept my savings and apartment. He kept the house and its debt. Exactly what two adults should expect when ending a marriage. By Friday morning, Grace called me laughing. "You have to see this counteroffer," she said. "I'm forwarding it now." Richard was demanding half of my inheritance because, according to him, marriage is a partnership where all assets are shared. He wanted lifetime alimony because I'd abandoned him during a mental health crisis, citing his spiritual journey as a medical necessity. He even claimed emotional distress damages because I'd maliciously sabotaged his self-discovery process. The best part was his self-written summary. My wife vindicatively abandoned our marital home while I was attending a therapeutic retreat for stress-related mental health issues. Grace could barely read it without laughing. A therapeutic retreat, she repeated, with his ex-girlfriend. For his mental health. The judge is going to suggest actual therapy, not alimony. No court in Texas is giving him assent after he ran off with another woman. By Friday afternoon, word had spread. Richard Fairfield, once the proud husband supported entirely by his teacher wife, was now unemployed, living in his childhood bedroom, and threatening to sue for abandonment. That same day, the principal's wife, Elaine, called. "I can get you approved for a mortgage," she said warmly. "With your teaching record and that inheritance as a down payment, you're golden. Let Richard handle his own house drama." By the weekend, I stood in my apartment, reviewing the purchase agreement Elaine had arranged. Below, the city hummed with life. Somewhere across town, Richard was probably sitting on his parents' floral couch, wondering how his spiritual awakening had landed him back in the room where he'd done his teenage homework. Stephanie Monroe had moved on, posting yoga selfies with her new instructor boyfriend, captioned #AuthenticLove. Vera Fairfield was still lamenting her ungrateful ex-daughter-in-law to anyone who'd listen. And I signed my name on the dotted line, the ink smooth and final. The apartment, bought with my money in my name, for my future, was now officially mine. 3 weeks had passed since I'd walked away from Richard's house, from that life. Each day since had revealed new truths about the man I'd married and the woman I'd almost forgotten I was. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright. Rachel and I sat in our usual corner booth at Brewster's Cafe, the one by the window overlooking downtown Dallas as it woke. We were laughing over my students' latest art projects when her expression suddenly froze. "Don't turn around," she whispered, gripping her cup. Of course I turned. Richard stood in the doorway. Vera flanked him on one side, and on the other was a woman I didn't recognize, older, dressed in pearls and a stiff church dress, holding a notebook like a weapon. He spotted me immediately. His face shifted into that carefully practiced look of sorrow. They moved toward us with the determination of a marching order. "Eleanor," Richard began, voice loud enough for the entire cafe to hear. "I've come to ask for your forgiveness." The stranger opened her notebook, pen poised, ready to record. Vera lifted her chin in triumph, daring me to make a scene. "Richard," I said evenly, "this is inappropriate." "Please," he said, breath quick, "just hear me out." He launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech, each word dripping with performance. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about us. About marriage. About second chances. I realize now," Richard said solemnly, "that my journey of self-discovery was just me running from the best thing in my life." Rachel nearly choked on her cappuccino. "I want to work on us," he continued, voice booming across the now silent cafe. "I want to try counseling, real counseling. Not the kind where..." The door chimed. Everything changed. Stephanie Monroe walked in hand with a tall, lean man whose yoga instructor energy was unmistakable. The moment she spotted Richard, she froze, eyes going wide with recognition, then fury. "Oh my God," she said loudly, her voice slicing through the tension. "Is this the married man who told me he was separated?" Every head in the cafe turned. She strode straight toward our table, brushing past Vera's attempt to block her path. Eleanor, right? Stephanie said, turning to me. Honey, you're a saint for putting up with him as long as you did. This pathological liar told me you knew about us, that you supported our reconnection. The churchwoman's notebook snapped shut. She turned to Vera, horrified. You said he was the victim here. This is a misunderstanding, Vera began, but the woman was already stepping away. I don't witness lies, she said sharply, heading for the exit. And I certainly won't be telling Pastor Williams that Richard deserves the congregation's support. Stephanie wasn't finished. 6 months, she said, glaring at Richard. He'd been messaging me for 6 months before that Colorado trip, lying, planning, talking about his loveless marriage while she nodded toward me, were at home doing his laundry. Richard's face turned the color of an overripe tomato. Stephanie, please don't. She held up a hand. I'm done being manipulated. Eleanor, I'm so sorry. If I'd known the truth, I never would've. She shook her head and left with her boyfriend, tossing one last line over her shoulder. Get therapy, Ben. Real therapy. Every phone in the cafe was recording now. Richard just stood there, his grand public gesture collapsing like a house of cards. We should go, Vera hissed, gripping his arm. They left, but the damage was irreversible. Within an hour, someone had posted the entire scene to our neighborhood Facebook page under the caption. Local man tries to win back wife he cheated on, gets called out by mistress. By Saturday afternoon, I was reorganizing my closet, a luxury of space I'd never had before, when my phone buzzed. Multiple neighbors had tagged me in a thread. Richard was in my apartment parking lot, with a guitar. Through the window, I watched him position himself under what he must have thought was my window. He was off by 2 floors, singing to Mrs. Kumar's living room instead. He strummed the opening chords, and I recognized the song immediately. Not our first dance, not our wedding song, Wonderwall. Stephanie's favorite song from high school. My neighbors had already gathered. Mr. Peterson from 3B was filming. The college kids from 2A were openly laughing. Mrs. Kumar opened her window and yelled, "Wrong apartment, Romeo." Building security arrived within minutes, followed soon after by the police when Richard refused to leave. I watched from above as he waved the guitar wildly, shouting, "It's not stalking, it's a romantic gesture. I'm trying to save my marriage." One officer replied flatly, "Sir, she's filed for divorce." This is harassment. By nightfall, the video was online. The comments were merciless. This is why she left him. Imagine being 40 and not knowing your wife's favorite song. Team Eleanor forever. Monday's court-ordered mediation took place in a beige conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and despair. Richard arrived in a suit I'd bought him 3 years earlier, lugging a laptop and a portable projector. Grace leaned over and whispered he brought visual aids. This should be good. Richard set up his PowerPoint with the confidence of a man incapable of self-awareness. The title slide read, "The Case for Reconciliation, an Analysis of Emotional Abandonment." The mediator, Janet, a weary woman with the expression of someone who'd seen every brand of disaster, lifted one eyebrow but let him proceed. Richard clicked through slides full of bullet points about personal growth and spiritual renewal. He even had charts measuring his emotional recovery timeline. "As you can see," he said, pointing at a pie chart, "my wife's departure interrupted crucial personal development, causing irreparable harm to my self-actualization process." Janet stopped him mid-sentence. "Mr. Fairfield, do you understand what marriage is?" "Of course," he replied earnestly. "It's a partnership." "Then why," she asked evenly, "did you leave your partner for another woman?" "It was a journey of..." Grace opened her folder with surgical precision. "I have 9 years of bank statements showing my client paid 70% of all household expenses. Here's a birthday card where Mr. Fairfield wrote, 'Thanks for being my mom away from mom.' Here are 12 neighbor statements confirming she covered for his absences." She slid another set of papers forward. "Here are his work evaluations citing excessive absenteeism. And here are credit card records showing thousands spent on his so-called spiritual journey." "That's enough," Janet said finally. "Mr. Fairfield, a PowerPoint presentation about emotional abandonment while you were literally with another woman is unique. I'm recommending the original settlement stand. During the break, I went to refill my water in the hallway. A man approached, tall, tired-looking, something familiar about his features. "You're Eleanor?" he asked. I nodded cautiously. "I'm Michael," he said. "Stephanie's ex-husband." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through a series of messages, screenshots dating back 6 months. Richard and Stephanie, planning their Colorado trip, their reunion, their lies, while both of us were still married. I looked at the screen for a long moment, then met Michael's eyes. "Guess we both dodged the same bullet," I said quietly. He smiled, weary but genuine. "Yeah, and I think it finally ran out of places to ricochet." "Richard called me his burden," Michael said quietly, scrolling through the messages on his phone. "He told Stephanie he just needed to wait for his promotion before leaving you, said he had to appear stable first." I stared at the text thread, my stomach tightening. "He didn't get the promotion," Michael added flatly. "Too busy planning his escape to do his actual job." One message stood out from the rest, the words glowing in the dim light of the hallway outside the mediation room. "Once I get this promotion, I'll have the financial security to leave Eleanor." She served her purpose. Served her purpose. Like I had been a temporary tool, not a human being. A chapter he could close when convenient. "Thank you," I said softly, returning the phone. "I'm sorry you went through this, too," I told him. Michael shrugged, though his expression was full of sympathy. "Stephanie's not a bad person," he said. "Just lost. And Richard, he's a parasite. He finds lost people and convinces them he's the cure." I passed the screenshots to Grace, who accepted them with the delighted calm of someone handed ammunition before a decisive victory. "This," she said, sliding the printouts into her folder, "is gold." Her smile was small and sharp, the look of a woman who already saw the ending written. When we returned to the mediation room, Richard was slumped in his chair, his PowerPoint still frozen on a slide titled, "The Economics of Emotional Support." 6 months. That's how long it had been since his Sunday announcement in our bedroom doorway. 6 months of Richard's unraveling. 6 months of my rebuilding. 6 months of learning that the hardest part of leaving wasn't leaving, it was finally believing I deserved to. The divorce papers sat between us on polished mahogany, a bridge waiting to burn from both ends. I reached for my favorite pen, the Mont Blanc my grandmother had given me for college graduation. Richard had borrowed it countless times and never returned it. Today, it was exactly where I had placed it, right inside my purse. Across from me, Richard rifled through his jacket, his briefcase, his folders. "Can I borrow a pen?" he asked, voice tight with embarrassment. Of course, he needed to borrow a pen. The man who'd borrowed my patience, my savings, my dreams, now borrowing a pen to sign away our marriage. His lawyer handed him a cheap blue bic, the kind you buy in packs of 50. Richard pressed down too hard as he wrote, indenting the pages beneath his signature, anger etched into every stroke. I signed next, smooth, deliberate, my name flowing like water returning home. When we finished, Richard hesitated. His lawyer stepped away, and Grace began packing her briefcase, leaving us briefly alone by the elevator. "Abby," he said softly, using that same practice tone he always used when apologies were performative, not sincere. "We could try again. I know who I am now. I know what I lost." I looked at him for what I knew would be the last time as his wife. His hair was thinner, his suit hung loose from stress, and his eyes carried that hollow gleam of a gambler who'd bet everything and lost. Standing there with his borrowed confidence and borrowed pen, he was exactly who he'd always been, someone who only existed in relation to what others could give him. "Richard," I said quietly, no anger, no triumph, just truth. "You did find yourself. This is who you are. And I found who I am without you." The elevator chimed softly. I stepped inside alone, leaving him standing there, still clutching someone else's pen. 6 months later, my apartment was no longer an escape plan. It was a home. Books lined the walls, their colorful spines forming a story of rediscovery. Richard would have called them clutter. I called them company. Art covered every surface, paintings from students, canvases from local street fairs, sketches from evenings when I couldn't sleep and needed to turn quiet into color. The kitchen always smelled like fresh bread again, lavender honey, rosemary olive, chocolate cherry, breads made because I wanted to, not because Sunday dinner required it. The spare room that had once been Richard's home gym turned storage dump was now my studio. North-facing light filled the room each morning, falling over canvases leaning in patient rows. I started painting again 3 months after the separation. My hands had trembled at first, clumsy and uncertain, but by the 10th canvas, I recognized myself again. I remembered how it felt to create something that didn't have to justify its existence. Without Richard's endless subscriptions, gym fees, and craft beer collections, my teacher's salary stretched further than I'd thought possible. I bought better groceries. I saved money. I even traveled. Thanksgiving in Paris hadn't been planned. Hannah called one morning and simply said, "Let's go." And for the first time in nearly a decade, I could just say yes. We stayed in a tiny Montmartre apartment with creaky floors and windows overlooking the rooftops. We climbed the Eiffel Tower in the rain. We ate croissants so perfect they ruined every breakfast memory before them. From a cafe where Hemingway once wrote, I mailed Rachel a postcard. Found myself. She was here all along. By February, the 7th month since everything ended, the school fundraiser arrived. I was manning the art auction table, explaining my students' projects to parents when a man approached carrying 2 coffees. "Mrs. Fairfield," he asked politely. "Miss Fairfield," I corrected, the name still feeling both new and familiar. "Right, sorry," he said, smiling. "I'm Adam Carter, Emma's dad. She talks about you constantly." He handed me one of the cups. "You mentioned loving lavender lattes during conferences a few months ago. They had them at the coffee truck outside." I blinked at the cup in my hand. He'd remembered an offhand comment from 3 months earlier about something as small as coffee. And for the first time in years, someone had actually listened. Richard hadn't remembered my coffee order in 9 years. Adam had remembered after one conversation. He was widowed. I learned his wife had passed 2 years earlier after a long battle with cancer, leaving him to raise their 7-year-old daughter, Emma, on his own. He worked from home as a graphic designer, a job that allowed him to be fully present for his daughter in the ways that mattered most. "She comes home glowing from your class," he said, smiling as we watched Emma excitedly lead other parents around the art display. "Yesterday she spent 3 hours painting because Miss Fairfield says art comes from our feelings." You've given her a way to process everything. We talked until the fundraiser wrapped up. He listened, really listened, without checking his phone or redirecting the conversation. He laughed at actual humor instead of the self-deprecating remarks I used to make to keep peace. And when I spoke, he asked questions that showed he was paying attention. "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" he asked as we cleaned up. "Maybe when you're not being ambushed with one you didn't ask for?" We took it slow. Coffee became lunch, lunch became dinner, dinner became Saturday outings to art museums, with Emma tagging along as a gleeful, 7-year-old matchmaker. "Miss Fairfield," she announced one sunny afternoon at the Botanical Gardens, "my dad thinks you're pretty and smart and nice." He told Grandma. Adam went crimson. I laughed. A real, unguarded laugh that startled me with how long it had been since the last one. A year after Richard's grand self-discovery announcement, my life had finally settled into rhythms I chose: quiet mornings, art, students, friends, and plans made on my own timeline. Rachel texted me a Facebook post from Vera Fairfield. "Please pray for my son Richard, still living in our basement, struggling to find purpose after a traumatic abandonment." Stephanie Monroe, meanwhile, was engaged to her yoga instructor boyfriend, sharing endless photos of sunset proposals and captioning them with #NamasteForever. And me? I was sitting in my apartment on a Sunday afternoon, grading essays where students had written about their heroes. 3 had chosen their art teacher. Adam was in the kitchen, humming softly while making his mother's secret pasta sauce recipe, filling my space with warmth that came without expectation. Hannah texted from Dallas about our upcoming summer trip to Greece, something we could finally plan instead of only dream about. Richard had been right about one thing: we both needed to find ourselves. He found a 40-year-old man who couldn't exist without someone managing his life, who confused dependence for love and chaos for purpose. And I found a woman who could stand alone so firmly that anyone beside her would be there by choice, not necessity. A woman whose days were full of color, creation, travel, and laughter. A woman who baked bread because she wanted to, not because anyone demanded it. A woman finally living a life that was hers. It turned out, I wasn't the one who stayed too long. I was the one who finally got away from a life that was never truly mine, to one that completely was. If this story of poetic, calculated revenge had you rooting for Eleanor from beginning to end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part? The moment Richard tried to serenade the wrong apartment window with Stephanie's favorite song instead of his wife's. What was your favorite dose of karma? Tell me in the comments below. And don't forget, subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another gripping story.